Now, a little bit about our speaker, Saijal. Saijal is the founder, CEO of Saij Wealth Consulting. She is also the host of Strictly Money, where she invites guests to discuss topical financial issues impacting Canadians. It's a must-watch. In addition to her current role, Saij will spend time in the private sector at Manulife Financial, as well as in broadcasting at CNBC and BNN. I've had the opportunity to know Saijal for a few years, and her ability to communicate messaging around financial wellness is just so valuable. Now, as always, if you have questions, please utilize the chat function, Q&A function, and I will ask a handful of these at the end of the session as much as time permits. We want this to be as interactive as possible, so I really encourage you to ask the questions that are important to you and your employees. So with that, it's my pleasure to welcome Saijal, and you'll see me at the end as I help moderate some questions. Saijal?
All right. Thank you very much, Mike. And thanks to all of you for joining this webinar today. I'm going to, I believe my share screen is on. So can you see this?
I believe it's just coming up. That's my last.
There we go. You can see that?
Oh, it's still coming up on screen. It has not come up yet, Saijal, but should be any moment.
Do I have to share screen again? Just want to make sure. Okay.
Yep.
Let's share screen. You can see that?
There we go.
Okay. There we go. So I'm really pleased to be collaborating with the Benefits Alliance Group on this topic, making financial wellness a workplace imperative, because financial wellness is a topic very dear to me. Making it accessible is even more important, and the whole reason why I started my financial education consultancy business about 4 years ago, partly because I know for a fact that there are many gaps, and yet there are, I think, many opportunities to close this gap and create prosperity, you know, not only for individuals, but for corporations, as you'll see, and for society at large. See if this works. There we go. So today's agenda, I'm going to talk about financial wellness. What is it? Because it's often misunderstood. So I'll go through what it is and the state of it, and why it matters. Why we even have the gaps that we do. Because I think many of you will be surprised. I'll talk about financial literacy elements. So what your employees really need to know when it comes to financial knowledge. There are must-haves and there are kind of nice-to-haves. And I think you'll see that there are things that you can naturally align to based on the benefits that you provide, right? There's some low-hanging fruit that you can definitely cover. And again, depends on your budget. So we'll go through that. 3, the return on investment, so positive solutions. And I'll go through some of the deliverables and best practices that you want to think about. We should have plenty of time for Q&A, and as Mike had mentioned, there's the Q&A box. So I encourage you ask questions, and I'll try to get to as many of those as I can at the end. So before I get started, I thought I would just quickly talk about why I started my business. Mike had done the introduction, but I think that the context and my why is important. I have been in the financial industry for well over 25 years. I started as an advisor's assistant. I was an advisor. I did high net worth financial planning, investment strategist, and then was a business journalist. And throughout that time, what was very obvious to me is that while it's hard, I'm hard pressed to find anyone who does not care about money. Very, very few people, and I would say 90% of people don't actually have the knowledge and the skills to be financially well. Certainly not in the more optimal way, right? There's a lot of improvising that goes on. So there's a lot of people who think they know and they don't know. There's a lot of people who don't know and think and want to know. And there's a group of people who just don't even know why it matters. And I would say it's not their fault, right? This is just not taught. And if it's not taught, people are not going to be aware of what they need to know and what to do about it. And I really wanted to change that. So that triangle there is my business model. It's how I work. I spend a lot of time working with women because women do have unique challenges when it comes to financial wellness. So I actually have an online program that's very much focused on women. I work with financial services companies to help them build programs and just different consulting projects, corporations, hence why I'm here. And then obviously media. I launched Strictly Money back in September. It's a national personal finance program that talks about a lot of these financial issues. So that's a little bit about my why. All right. So let's get started. What is financial wellness? So this is the official definition of financial wellness. You know, a lot of times we don't talk about financial wellness. We talk about physical wellness and we talk about mental wellness, right? But not often financial wellness. So according to the OECD, it's a state of being reflecting a person's ability to meet current and ongoing financial obligations, feel secure in their financial future, and make choices that allow enjoyment of life. So I try to break it down, right? So what does that really mean? Well, you should have control over your day-to-day finances, right? You should know where your money is coming in from and where it's going to. You should have the capacity to absorb a financial shock. So adequate emergency funds. And this was, I would say this was really highlighted during the pandemic, but definitely when it started. You should have financial freedom to make choices to enjoy life. And you should be on track to meet your financial goals, right? And they should be SMART. That's an acronym many of you may have heard of, but being specific, measurable, achievable, so it should be realistic, relevant, and timely is what I mean by that. Now, most people will focus on 1 and 3. It's usually the 4th one, the goals one, that gets improvised. The reality is, though, we have a huge financial wellness gap, right? Lots and lots of people are living paycheck to paycheck. Lots of people are overwhelmed with their debt. 43% of Canadians. Now that number was about 35 a year ago, and it's creeping up. And I have to think it's because of inflation, housing affordability, right? It'll be interesting to see where that number is even 6 months from now. But look at the last one. Lots and lots of people just have no idea if they're saving enough for retirement. And I would argue that most people are not saving enough for retirement. So when it comes to financial wellness, I want to address some of the myths and misconceptions around it. Okay. Financial wellness, I hear this one a lot. Financial wellness it's not a priority for people. I meet with organizations and I meet with HR leaders, and often they tell me, like, we don't have a problem with financial wellness. I mean, none of our employees talk about it, or none of our members talk about it. I can guarantee you it's on everyone's mind. I can guarantee it, because financial wellness is also one of the top causes of stress for people globally. Everyone understands in a capitalistic society that it's important that we have money, not just to survive, but also thrive. The reason people or HR leaders or corporations think that it's not a problem is because of shame and stigma. Nobody talks about their problems or their challenges, right? I mean, you're going to be very hard pressed to find an employee going up to their manager and saying, hey, I'm in debt, or my partner lost their job, Or I have a child who's not moving out and begging me to pay for their home, or I just don't have enough for retirement, or I made a bad investment. They're not going to have those conversations with their manager. They're likely going to say something else like, oh, I'm just stressed, or I'm not sleeping, or something else, right? But I promise you, I've talked to thousands of people. I know that this is an issue. The second myth I hear is financial wellness is not about being stressed. It's part right, but this insinuates that financial wellness is a feeling. And I just went through the definition of what financial wellness is, right? And what I say is the actual gap that I'm seeing is this perception versus reality. So there's a lot of people I know that feel financially well. You know, they're like, oh, there's no problems. And I can look at their financial situation and they have $50,000 saved for retirement and they're 60 and they're like, I feel fine. Well, they're not financially well. Just because they feel that way doesn't mean they're well. On the flip side, you know, you take my parents, for example, in their 80s, and they stress all the time that they're going to run out of money. And I have to keep telling them, you're not going to outlive your savings. You have plenty, right? So it's not a feeling. And I always say the only way you can really close that perception versus actuality is through building knowledge and skills. So they know exactly where they stand and what they need to do, or it's a reconfirmation that they're okay, right? We can't go by a feeling. The third myth I hear is that financial literacy is the answer to financial health. And again, it's only part true because it is an important piece. The more important piece is what you do with that knowledge. And I'll talk about that in a minute. And the fourth one, and I think this one's very relevant to organizations, is the thinking that the more money one makes, the better off they will be. Well, I just need more money and I'll be financially well. It's really about how you manage that money, isn't it? And I've seen, again, thousands and thousands of cases where people are just not managing their money as effectively as they can. So it's not about having more money necessarily. It's how you're managing it. I talked about the financial stress piece. And again, we don't often talk about financial wellness and financial stress. We talk about other aspects. But this is the financial stress index has been done by CP Canada. And it shows 38% of Canadians said money was their biggest concern. More than personal health, more than work, more than relationships. So I always find it interesting, you know, when we talk about mental stress, that sometimes we're not making that connection that it could be related to money. And that's one of the causes for it. 51% of Canadians have said they've lost sleep over money concerns. 31% say that it's led to health problems. Big increase just in 1 year. The reason why I have the difference between men and women as well is because women feel more stress, financial stress, than men. I spoke about the unique challenges that women have, and really this is it, right? Women face a greater wage gap, but an even bigger wealth gap. Because they save less, if they're getting paid less, because they take career breaks, they tend to, that means they're paying less into a pension, whether it's a corporate pension or a government pension. They're less likely to invest compared to a male counterpart. So that 20% wealth gap, if you take it, could easily translate to a 40% wealth gap. Plus, they live longer typically than men, so they have to stretch it out longer. So every single study that I have looked at, and because I've worked in Asia, I have clients in Asia, every study I've looked at shows that women across the board feel more financial stress than men. And to really drive this home, I mean, you can really see this connection between financial stress and physical, mental stress and the impact on work, right? Those who are financially stressed, twice as likely to report poor health, sleep problems, depression, especially if they're in debt. And then work, right? 43% say financial stress is affecting their work performance. So why do we have these financial wellness challenges? Why is there a gap? I've spent a lot of time researching this, and certainly my contact with individuals, my work has given me a lot of insight. And the way I like to break it down is, there's two sort of big influences, right? You have your external influences, things that you can't quite control. Maybe if you voted differently, but overall, a lot of it's out of our hands. And then there's the internal influences. So let's talk about the external influences. We are definitely living in a time of greater political uncertainty. Obviously, we're seeing that right now in the news, and economic uncertainty. And I would say that really, I think that really shifted with the great financial crisis in 2008. Rising expenses, right? Expenses are going through the roof. I don't have to tell anyone what we're experiencing now with inflation, but wages are not keeping up. We've lived in a prolonged low interest rate environment. And so, I know all of you know this, when it comes to pension plans, so many of the corporations said, you know what, I don't want to take on the responsibility to try to fund someone who's living until they're 80 or 90. So basically funding a 30-year retirement. I don't want to do it anymore in a low interest rate environment. So we saw this big switch, right? A lot of organizations moved from a defined contribution or benefit plan to a contribution plan. Except the problem is, as you see, a lot of people just don't know. Like shifting that burden on the individual, they're not planning for retirement. They don't even know how to invest. So that's a big issue. The middle one, I have shame. I talked a little bit about that, but I would say this is probably one of the biggest challenges is there's a lot of shame and stigma. We don't talk about money as a society. We certainly don't talk about our challenges. And if we don't talk about it, we're definitely not, we're not gaining the awareness to do something about it then. Accessibility, I think the world of finance is still seen as this secret club, and in some ways it is. It's still filled with a lot of jargon and complicated concepts that I think is unnecessary. And that's the part that I've really set out to change. Then there's the internal influences, the things that we do have in control, but then we also face a lot of challenges there as well. Confidence is a really big one. You have to have the self-efficacy and the self-belief that you can learn what you need to learn to actually build the financial skills. And confidence is pretty low. And because I work with more women than men, work with both, but women, this is the one that's women tend to be less confident in their ability. Men tend to be overconfident, by the way, but it's, I'm generalizing, but that's typically what we see. Behavioral awareness is an interesting one. I have that in there because I'm a big believer in, if you want to change the situation, you got to change the environment. You got to make that path easy. And unfortunately, in today's society, the path is not easy. We are living more and more in a world of instant gratification. We want everything now. We want everything fixed tomorrow. There's nothing instant about being financially well. This is a lifelong process. You don't just retire and suddenly think that you can come up with $200,000 if you're short. It just doesn't work like that. And that's a really big challenge for us, right? The behavioral awareness. Financial knowledge, obviously, very important piece. but then you got to execute on it, right? So that's why I have the pluses. And in our sort of financial literacy world, we talk about financial capability, not literacy. So, when I talked about the myth that it's all about literacy, it's not. To be financially well, you actually need all four of these pieces. So if you don't have the confidence, you're not going to do the other parts, right? If the path is just really, really difficult, and no matter what you do, you just have an environment that's not conducive to being financially well, you only have so much willpower. If you have the knowledge and you do nothing about it, so you don't execute, you're going to fail. If you execute and you don't know what you're doing, you're going to fail, right? So that's why all of those pieces are really important. And I raise this with you because if you are thinking about a program, I want you to just understand that these all tie in, so you're making the right impact when you're doing it. So let's talk about the financial literacy elements, right? What do your employees need? Well, one of the important things I think to recognize is to manage your money, to be financially well, you actually have to take a holistic approach. And most people don't think like that, right? I have this piece because, and I start off with this piece because we as a society are taught how to make money, right? We go out and we work, and we work 40, 50, 60 hours a week. We're not taught how to manage it. We don't even spend time. Most people don't spend even 15 minutes a week managing their money. And I would argue that managing your money is just as, probably even more important than making it. So we go to work, and it's like why I say it's a false confidence is we just think, well, as long as we're getting a salary, we're okay. And I think for corporations, this is a huge, it's a challenge because people do think like that. They think, well, as long as I'm making money, as long as I'm getting more money, so the more they pay me, the more I'm going to be okay. But what happens is you get a salary, you sort of spend, and savings is sort of improvised, right? You just save whatever's left over. And it's often not done with a goal, with forethought. And that's why investments also plays a big role. Oh, and by the way, when I talk about this, I bring this up when I'm talking to women. And this is really important because I have so many women tell me, and they've been told, well, I manage the budget, the household budget, so I must be financially well. I must know what I'm doing. And that's where I hit back and I say it builds self-confidence, because at some point the salary ends. You still got to plan for a 30-year retirement, right? So that tends to be a big eye opener, I think, for a lot of people. Investing, very, very important piece. The problem is investing is often improvised, and it's neglected, right? I always say anyone can slap a few stocks together and say they're investing, but it's a thing that blows them up because it's not done in a sustainable way. They don't think about diversification, growing for the long haul. And for women especially, but even those who face a wealth gap, this is a really, really important piece to equalizing, or at least closing that gap. Planning. Most wing it, right? Again, you can have a pool of money and you can focus on investing, but if you don't have a strategy on how you're going to use that money to do the things that you want to do in life effectively, then you could run into problems. And why I say most people wing it is, you've got to plan for the different stages of your life, especially retirement. But that's the piece, because it feels so far away for most people. It's the part that gets neglected. And then protection. Protection is often neglected. We don't think about life insurance or critical insurance or disability insurance. I hear a lot, oh, it's just too costly, but it's a really, really important piece. And the point I want to make with this slide is that everything is integrated. When you don't focus on one or you neglect one, you can possibly create this negative domino effect. So if you are not protected and something goes wrong, well, then you're going to pull money out of your investments. You're going to go into debt, which means you're not going to be able to plan, right? So they're all connected is the point that I want to make with this. So for the pieces that you want to think about, if you're, putting a program in for your employees, I want to go one level sort of deeper and some of the things that your employees would really need to know and where you want to focus. Yeah, I talked about the savings and debt management, right? Well, we know from the financial wellness stats or the state of financial wellness that 50% are living paycheck to paycheck, 43% are overwhelmed with debt. This is going to be a key piece for you because I guarantee you a lot of your employees are in that situation. Again, they're not going to talk about it, right? The middle one I will get to, but I saw that as all connected, and I'll speak to why. I think this is an area where a lot of you could focus on. There's a lot of opportunities based on probably some of the benefits that you have. Protection, and the other one is estate planning. Again, most people will focus on the savings and think that to be financially well, it's all about savings, maybe even a bit of investing. But these are actually the key pieces of financial planning and why you have to take a holistic approach. So if we look at savings and debt management, some of the things that you may want to think about running is education around budgeting, around saving strategies, because believe me, there are strategies around that, and debt differentiation and pay down strategies. Believe it or not, a lot of people they're not even aware that there's such thing as good debt and bad debt. They don't understand how credit cards are even used, that credit cards are bad debt, the interest that they're paying on it, versus how you leverage a mortgage in the right way. What sort of debt do you pay off first, and how do you make it a little bit easier? So there's a lot of opportunity there. I run these workshops. It does quite well. I tend to go even a level deeper and talk about awareness and money personalities, because believe it or not, we all have money personalities that affects that piece. The life goal planning, or the blue section, the reason why I have this is when I talked about that planning section, see, all of us have life goals, whether it's buying a house, paying for a kid's education, having children, retiring, vacation, all of those things. Well, all of that requires money. And corporations tend to focus on the one piece, right? The retirement piece, which is a very, very important piece. The problem, I guess, with that is that for most employees, it feels like it's ages away. And there's a lot of life that happens and a lot of planning for life that happens before retirement. So they're like, I'm not thinking about retirement planning because I'm thinking about buying my first home, or I'm thinking about how I'm going to pay for my kids if I have kids, or something else, right? So I often have this conversation with corporations and say, Saij, we offer these group RSPs and we offer matching, and our employees aren't taking us up on it. Well, that's why. They're in debt, so they're not even thinking about retirement, which is why the first piece is important. And two, they're thinking about all these other pieces and not even understanding the importance of retirement planning or how to create a strategy to make sure they're trying to meet all these goals. So I think for any of you, organizations that offer some type of group RSP or defined contribution plan, there's a real opportunity to educate here, this piece. I have the goals-based investing because if you do offer maybe group RSP is a little bit different, but if you are offering a DC plan, I can guarantee you that most of your employees have no idea how to invest for it, right? I remember being handed out a list of like 50 mutual funds and like, figure it out. And I'm like, wow, I have a CFA and this is a bit overwhelming for me. I can't imagine what someone does when they don't even understand the basics of investing. And I can tell you that you're putting yourself in a liability position when you do that, because they're going to come to you and say, you gave me this. I thought I had a plan. I thought I was doing the right thing, and now I have no money for retirement. I can also tell you that most employees don't even know the difference between a defined benefit and a contribution plan, because I'm constantly having that conversation. So here's a real opportunity to educate. The tax planning, what I mean by that, I'm not talking about complicated tax planning, although it's very important. But I think, again, real opportunity to educate around what a TFSA is versus an RSP. Again, lots of people don't know the difference, right? And just simple little strategies that tie into some of the things that you might offer that can really help your employees. Even spousal plans is a really good one to be able to tax split. Then there's protection. If you are offering any type of life insurance or critical insurance or disability insurance, again, a lot of people don't know. They don't really understand the value of it. They probably also think that what you offer is enough. And in most cases, we know it is not enough, right? Depends on the family situation, but they don't really know, do I have enough coverage or not? So I get these questions a lot. Again, opportunity to educate there. Estate planning is a really important piece. I have that sort of grade because it would be a great opportunity for you to educate, but it's probably the piece that if you needed to leave something out, that would probably be it. Hopefully your employees have some sort of a will and stuff, but estate planning becomes even more important, I guess, later on, right? So why I have the numbers, the 30, 50, 10, 10 is kind of my assessment subjective, but if you had to focus anywhere with a limited budget, you probably want to focus on the first part, right? The savings and debt management, because that's really the foundation, and then the blue section if you had to. Protection, you could probably even do that in one workshop if you really wanted to, just to make sure that your employees understand what they're getting and the value of it. So let's talk about the ROI, the return on investment positive solutions, and the deliverables and best practices. And I guess before I get into what you do, you should probably understand the cost of having a financially unwell employee, or to flip it, how much money you save by making sure that your employees are financially well. So believe it or not, the cost savings for companies can be anywhere from $5,000 to $8,000 for every financially healthy employee. And it seems like a lot. I've actually seen higher numbers, and I think I'm being pretty conservative when I actually pick this, because there's just a lot of elements that you want to think about, right? I've already talked about the stress and the impact of stress. Well, I think most of you probably know the cost of mental stress. And some of this does tie in, and then there's more to it. So, higher productivity, definitely one, because we know, you saw that 43% of people say that financial stress affects their performance at work. Obviously, the stress part affects health, employee attraction and retention, which I'll talk about, and then on-time retirement. So if you look at higher productivity, well, financially well employees are 16% more productive. So you just want to think about, well, what does that mean? I mean, if they're not being productive, how much lost productivity? Like what is that costing me? What's their value of their input and contribution? just simple number, if you take someone who's making, say, $50,000 a year and they're 16% less productive, that could be around $8,000. Now, someone's not going to be on, productive every single minute of the day. So you can take a little bit more conservative figure, but that kind of gives you a sense of what that's costing. Increased health, those financially well are less likely to take time off work. I've seen numbers where those who are financially stressed take about 3 days, 3 extra sick days. Well, if it's 40% of your staff that's doing that, that's a cost. If they're not sleeping well or they're getting sick more often, they're claiming more in benefits, right? They're getting prescriptions. There's a cost to that. Employee attraction and retention. 80% say a financial wellness program would encourage them to stay. I tend to focus on that cost of turnover. Like I said, if your employees think that making more money, which, is legit, I understand that, but too many people think that that's automatically the solution. So they job hop. Well, this company is going to be paying me more. They don't know that it's often comes down to how they're managing it. And they don't know that because they don't have the tools and the knowledge to manage. So cost of turnover, I've seen numbers where it costs, 20% of someone's salary to retrain, attract employees. So again, you want to think about that piece. And the on-time retirement as well. Lots and lots of people are saying they're going to delay their retirement by several years because they haven't saved enough. So from an employer's perspective, what is that costing you? In terms of just managing resources and talent effectively, they're probably at their peak salary at that stage. So again, some of the things that you want to think about. When I look at numbers like this and I say, okay, well, if someone's making, say, $50,000 and you have, I'm just picking numbers, but $50,000, you got 50 employees, you assume that 40% are not financially well, that's $100,000 right there. And you're not going to spend even close to that on a financial wellness program, right? You certainly don't have to. So when we talk about solutions, I go back to this piece because that's where you're going to make the impact, right? How do you build up your employees' financial capability? The foundation, I always say, it's going to be the confidence piece, which actually kind of ties into the shame and the accessibility piece. You really want to think about creating a safe and non-judgmental environment. Asking questions, understanding what is it that your employees are stressed about? What do they need? And what do they want? I guess sometimes they're not the same thing. I've seen situations where someone says, well, Saijal, I need this. I want knowledge on how to invest in cryptos. And I look at their situation, it's like, well, that's not actually what you need to be financially well. You don't even have money to save, right? So, but you want to be in that phase of, especially if you're starting from scratch, or you're finding that what you've offered and what you've done isn't working, I'd say step back and say, find out what your employers, where their stress points are, what challenges are really facing, and reiterate the importance of financial wellness. The things that I've taught you here, most employees don't know. They don't know what financial wellness is. They don't even know why they're struggling. So there's a real opportunity. I think anonymous surveys work very well because of the shame and stigma. You'll get a lot of feedback. I would encourage a town hall or a bigger webinar and try to do something that's almost mandatory. If you say, hey, we're running a financial wellness workshop, it's voluntary. There's a lot of people who won't go because A, they don't even know that they're not financially well. And two, again, there's a stigma. It's like admitting that you have a problem. So by opening it up and making it a bigger sort of company event, you tend to get the buy-in a lot easier. And it's low cost, right? You can do a webinar, you can bring someone in to help facilitate. That's, often what I do. It doesn't have to be very expensive to do something like this. And you'll get a lot of insight by just doing that survey and even the conversations that are happening. Financial knowledge, I talked about the pieces that you want to think about executing, but this is more around by doing the survey, by getting some feedback, you'll know where to prioritize. I kind of give you a sense of where to prioritize, but prioritize the key topics that your employees want to learn. The content should be easy to digest, no jargon. This stuff is very overwhelming for most people. It's just not a language that they would know, nor should they know. I just happened to study it for a long time, so it's in my wheelhouse, but I recognize that this is not something that most people are familiar with. It should be relatable to one's life. Everyone's financial situation is going to be different. Some people are going to be more focused on debt. Some people are going to be focused on investing. Some people just have different challenges based on gender or ethnicity. So where you can, try to do that. Leverage partners. You're not going to have the in-house expertise, nor should you be expected to. That's what partners are for. And try to pick partners that are free from bias. I think a lot of organizations do a better job at that, but some still try to pitch their products and stuff, and it's a big turnoff for a lot of employees. Because again, they don't want to be sold to, especially when they don't know what they should know. The reason why I have this one sort of lumped in one as well as sort of knowledge, behavior, and execution is you can teach them, you want to make sure that they're executing. You want to make sure that behavioral awareness or that path is really easy for them. Everyone learns differently, and there are certain types that work better, certain formats that work better for certain topics. Like I said, town halls are great to get the buy-in and get that buzz, building that awareness and for the corporation, for your employees. In-person workshops, I find work the best, where there is that level of engagement and the employees are hearing from their peers, because it builds confidence and they feel like they're not alone, that other people have some of the challenges that they have. Online webinars are also great because it goes to the second point, making it on demand, because they'll go back and watch it when they're ready to watch it. Not everyone realizes that they have a debt problem, or that problem could be a couple of months from now and they're like, hey, I went to that webinar, but now I forgot what that was about. So, having something like that available so they can go back and rewatch something is great. Online webinars also are great when you are thinking about privacy. So if someone's really struggling with debt, they may not want to show up in an in-person workshop, because it's like admitting they have a debt problem. Now, there's ways around it. You can create a safe environment, but sometimes it's good that there are certain things that are online and more anonymous. And then you can think about articles and resources. You're not going to necessarily have the resource to write it, but there is just great government, even websites that are neutral and that you can just create and copy the link over, send out a newsletter, or have an intranet. Right, you can post it on there. So there's ways around it, and the cost doesn't have to be a lot. So we're almost at the end of it. I just wanted to mention this again, some of the myths that I hear, and addressing that. Right, I often hear, well, if I do this financial wellness, if I start raising the awareness, or I talk about this, you're just going to want more money. I think by now you know that it's not a money problem. Financial wellness is a spending, it's a fear of missing out, it's a planning problem. It's often not an income problem. So by just empowering them and giving them those tools, believe me, they'll recognize that the management part is important. We don't discuss money. It's too personal. Again, I hear that a lot. And I'm going to say that's too bad because everyone, again, cares about money, and you can't separate the problems that they're having at home with work, right? They're bringing those issues into work, and they often they think the solution is you paying them more. So it's important to address some of these issues, again, especially when it pours into their performance and stress. Some financial content should do the trick. I think you know now that it really, you have to take a holistic approach. And then I get this one, I did a workshop, it didn't work. It's important on understanding how you did that workshop. One workshop is not going to cut it. It's like saying, I brought someone in we did a cooking class, and our employees are not healthy. That's because it's a process. And some repetition and relevance is going to be the important part to make sure that they continue on that journey. Okay, so that's the end of my presentation. I just wanted to say, if you have any questions that I can't answer, or you want to know how I can help, please feel free to reach out. I have a digital online program. There's one that is in a pilot stage right now, the Sage Wealth Academy, which is really for all employees, quizzes built in. If you want to learn more about it and get on the waiting list, please reach out. I have the Strictly Money program that's been running for 1.5 years. That's exclusively for women. We've had now 600 women go through it. Great feedback on that. So that's another program. And then just consulting. If you want to know how to build it internally, or you want me to come in and run workshops, feel free to reach out. And that's where you can get a hold of me. All right. I'll stop sharing this. And take your questions if you have any.
There we go. Saijal, thank you so much. Just on the last slide, because I brought it up at the beginning, where can, we talked a little bit about Strictly Money. Where can our viewers or participants see that? And just a little bit of how you got into that, because it's super fascinating.
Okay. Yeah. So Strictly Money is on a network called The News Forum. You can Google it, thenewsforum.ca. You can go back and watch some of my episodes there. I think they have the last 5, but it's also aired. If you go to the site, it'll tell you where it's aired, but it's on Rogers, TELUS, Bell, Bell 5, SaskTel. So it's in about 5 million homes across Canada. There's a YouTube site as well, so you can watch some of my previous episodes there. The reason I got into, I wasn't actually planning on going back to TV, but I just felt like, the work that I was doing, that everyone wanted to know about money, and I can hear the frustrations about just not understanding and knowing enough. And I didn't feel like we had a media platform, certainly not on a national level, that talked about some of these issues, right? I mean, I worked at BNN and CNBC, and I loved it. That has its own niche. It's very capital markets driven. And my message is, markets going up and down is not going to affect people's financial wellness in the long run. They have to think about planning and estate planning and retirement. It's a whole other conversation. So yeah, I pitched and I said, I really want to talk about this because I just think it's too important not to. That's where it started. We're 30 shows in now.
Well, I've watched a few of them, and they're really insightful topics. So for our advisors on the call today, I do believe that 323 is going to put the link in the. There we go. Just as I announce it, it appears. That's just. So I recommend everyone checking that out. So we do have some questions, some in the chat feature, some were sent to me directly. So if you see me on my phone, I'm just going through those questions.
Sure.
You talked a bit about privacy right at the end. So as an employer in privacy, are there boundaries that I need to respect if an employee wants to talk about their finances? So this is a bit of an HR question, but I'm interested to hear your perspective too.
Yeah, and I always say it's really not your job to. I think a lot of HR leaders get worried, right? Like, I don't want to be the person to talk about their financial issues. And I think that's where the partnership comes in. So yeah, I would say there are boundaries. Like, this is really about educating and empowering them. But if they have challenges, I mean, this is where you leverage your partners. You have, you're not necessarily going to recommend advisors, right? But there are like credit counselors that you can recommend them to. There's resources. I mean, this is what I do in terms of the education piece. Coaches out there.
Yeah.
So that's where you want to refer out, but it should not be the corporation's job to do that. It's just far too sensitive. So I hope that helps. But it is really about leveraging partners.
A few questions about webinars and town halls.
Yeah.
Obviously, we've been in COVID-19 world for a couple of years now, and many of us are used to interacting with these type of sessions. In your experience, do you find employees are more likely to connect with someone internally or outside an office, and versus having a in-person session versus webinars? Or from your experience, do you see greater success in getting people together, or have you found success in hosting a webinar like today?
Yeah, I would say it's funny because that's all I've done is online webinar for the last 2 years. But when I was doing it in person, definitely a bigger impact, because you see when you're there in a room, you're more focused, and you're also seeing your peers and some of the questions they're asking and facial expressions. And to be honest, it's the stuff that happens after the webinar. I've done these, and I've worked with executives, and I said, just watch what happens afterwards. And there's a lineup of people wanting to chat with me, and they're having their own conversations, right? And that's where like a lot of this information it's solidified, and you get that buy-in. So when you can do the in-person, it is better. But webinars also work. Like I wouldn't say it's like a massive difference. Where I would say is when you're trying to gather feedback, try to use the anonymous.
Yeah. Staying on the topic of workshops, a question in the chat: if an employer set up a workshop, how would you measure ROI, or is it just the right thing to do?
I don't know how you measure ROI on a workshop. And again, it would depend on the type of workshop. But I will give you one example. This is before COVID. I was asked to come in to talk about financial goals and how to set that up. And this company had a group RSP. So I said, they're like, well, we don't know how to save for retirement, like trying to save 20%. I said, hold on. You guys have a group RSP and there's a matching program. I knew that because I had that discussion with this company before. And half of the room said, what? What's a group RSP? We have one? They weren't even aware. And so 2 days later, I had the HR person call me with feedback, which was thankfully good feedback. But they said we had 30 people enroll in our group RSP. So that's some immediate stuff, right? Is that I was able to help, and they saw the immediate impact on that. But other ways of, it's not going to be based on one webinar. I think you have to do a series. And one of the ways is honestly simple surveys. Like if you're doing employee engagement surveys, tie in some of those questions, and you'll get feedback.
We have time for a couple more. When saving for retirement and an emergency fund, where does debt come in? If all high interest debt is paid, credit cards, and there is, for an example, a student loan, what is the advice here to navigate all? Just stick to the payment plan and keep saving? Or is there another approach?
Sorry. Yeah, there's a lot there.
So when saving for retirement and emergency fund, where does debt come in? And then obviously managing different levels of debt based off the interest rate.
Yeah. Yeah. So I talk about that. It's, you want a savings, your emergency, you got to save for that
Yeah.
first. Just because if you don't have that and emergencies come up, you're just going to go in further into debt.
Yeah.
I always encourage pay off the high interest debt. And this is what a lot of people aren't aware of. I get this question a lot. Should I invest or should I pay off debt? High interest debt, credit cards, 20% after tax. You know, it's rare that you're going to be able to make that in the market.
Yeah.
So I would say pay that off first. When it comes to some of the lower interest debt, then you start balancing out.
Yeah.
Because people forget that the retirement saving is also, you're taking advantage of compounding. There's a tax saving element of it, right? And I also look at the behavioral part. It's really about getting into the discipline of doing it. Otherwise, people use that excuse of, well, I just have debt, so I'm just going to keep paying off debt, and they never get out of debt, and then they never save for retirement. But that's a conversation that I typically have with a group, and I think most people get that.
2 more questions quickly. What are some of the most common jargon acronyms that make you cringe?
Oh boy, I don't even know anymore because I try not to use jargon. I'm trying to think of what would be. Yeah, I'm trying to think of what that would be. Even just assuming, well, just even, you know, talking about acronyms around like stocks and different types. Honestly, even things like ETFs, believe it or not, like we say ETFs as if people understand what ETFs are. Again, telling you most people don't know. They don't know the difference between mutual funds and ETFs. So if you talk about like even fees around that, most people don't know. So I just say anything that you're talking about, you just have to explain. Does everyone know what that is? Define benefit and contribution plans. I know this sounds really simple. Most people don't know the difference.
And now we're in the world of crypto and NFTs.
Yeah, that's, yeah, I get bombarded with a lot of those questions. And I try to explain it as best I can. And I'm honest, like when I don't know, I don't know. And I don't even try.
One last question. The individual loves the content and your programs are so needed. How do you suggest getting this offering out to all clients, all need, but how do you get you in front of them in a way that makes sense? Do you have a lot of marketing pieces perhaps?
I have some. So I would just say, like, email me, reach out, and because every corporation is different. Like, and I'll tell you, anytime I do a webinar, anytime a workshop, it's always bespoke. I've never run the same one because to me, it's all about impact. You're wasting your money if you're just thinking you're going to just run one in an hour or something. It's all about impact. So I sit down with you and said, who are your employees? What do you know? What you don't know? And then I tailor something for you. So I would just say reach out, and then we could go from there, because I would have to know what you've done and what's worked and what's not worked and what your objectives are.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, Saijal, thank you so much for today. Super insightful as always. I think some valuable takeaways, and our members will have this after. So thank you. And thank you for everyone for watching. We always appreciate the contribution and participation. So everyone have a fantastic Tuesday, and we'll see everyone again at our next event.
Thanks, everyone.